Since the earliest times, the apocalypse has echoed as a prophecy that crosses borders, religions, and generations. Among all the images in the book of Revelation, one of the most enigmatic writings attributed to John of Patmos, none is as powerful and unsettling as that of the Four Horsemen. They do not appear as mere allegorical figures. They are described as inevitable forces, messengers of something greater, symbols of a collapse that cannot be avoided. When their presence is mentioned in chapter 6 of Revelation, there is no room for doubt. The world as it was known would be marked by transformation and destruction. But what do these horsemen truly represent? What message is hidden in their shadowy ride? The biblical narrative describes that when the first four seals of the divine scroll are opened, each horseman appears, mounted on a horse of a distinct color, bringing with them a specific fate for humanity. These images were not born by chance. Scholar Elaine Pagels, in Revelations, Visions, Prophecy, and Politics in the Book of Revelation, points out that the visions of the apocalypse were shaped by the context of persecution and war that marked the Roman Empire. Thus, the horsemen became not only a religious omen, but also a reflection of humanity's oldest pains: conquest, war, famine, and death. And here lies the essential question. Are they merely metaphors or universal forces that, sooner or later, always return? After all, who can deny that the cycle of conquest paves the way for wars, that wars inevitably generate famine, and that from famine, death arises? This sequence is not merely symbolic, it is almost mathematical, like a pattern that repeats throughout the history of humankind. Today, when we revisit the figure of the Four Horsemen, we are not only speaking of biblical mythology, but of a mirror, a reflection that, if closely observed, reveals our own fears, our collective failures, and the reminder that perhaps the ride has never truly ended. And so the journey begins. First, the Horseman of Conquest emerges on the horizon, mounted on his white horse. But who is he? A savior or a tyrant? A bearer of order or the beginning of chaos? The description is found in Revelation 6, verse 2. "And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." This figure evokes ambiguous interpretations. For centuries, scholars have asked, is he the embodiment of inevitable victory or the harbinger of cruel domination? Historians such as Bernard McGinn, in Visions of the End, explain that the white horse has always carried meanings of triumph and purity. Yet, in the narrative of Revelation, the Horseman of Conquest brings not only the brilliance of victory, but also the shadow of ambition. Where there is conquest, there is also subjugation. Where one empire rises, others are crushed. Could this not be the first step toward inevitable downfall? After all, how many times has history recorded kings and generals who, upon conquering new territories, left behind not only glory, but the spark for endless wars? And it is precisely here that the second horseman emerges. When the second seal is opened, the horseman of war appears, mounted on a horse as red as blood, wielding a great sword. Revelation 6 verse 4 describes, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword." Red is no randomly chosen color. It symbolizes violence, spilled blood, the flame of human fury. The horseman of war does not appear out of nowhere. He is the consequence of conquest. For every domination generates resistance, and every resistance turns into conflict. An empire that rises upon others inevitably spreads hatred, division, and the desire for vengeance. And so, the narrative connects. Conquest opens the doors to war, a cycle humanity knows all too well, from Rome to the Crusades, from revolutions to modern conflicts. There is no victory without cost, and the price of ambition is always paid in blood. But if war spreads, what remains for the devastated populations? It is then that a third horseman approaches.
The Horseman of Famine emerges on a black horse, carrying a pair of scales in his hands. Revelation 6, verses 5 and 6 describes, "And I looked, and behold a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." The image is brutally clear: scarcity, inflation, suffering. The Horseman of Famine is not mere misfortune. He is the inevitable consequence of war, of devastated lands, lost harvests, and economic chaos. As historian William H. McNeill observes in Plagues and Peoples, periods of prolonged conflict rarely bring only military victories. More often, they unleash famine, epidemics, and widespread suffering. The Horseman of Famine personifies this inexorable law. Where there is war, bread becomes scarce, and the price of survival becomes unbearable. It is impossible to separate his advance from that of the Horseman of War. They form a symbolic sequence, a cruel cycle that history repeatedly confirms. And finally, the last horseman appears, the Horseman of Death, mounted on a pale horse, followed by Hades. In Revelation 6, verse 8, we read, "And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the 4th part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." He is the inevitable culmination. The Horseman of Death does not appear by chance. He is the consequence of conquest, of war, and of famine. Every action, every ambition, every conflict aligns for his inexorable advance. The symbolic cycle of the 4 horsemen reveals something disturbing. Destruction is not random. It is a sequential, almost natural chain of events. Victory brings war, war brings famine, and famine leads to death. As the philosopher and historian Oswald Spengler wrote in The Decline of the West, civilizations move in inevitable cycles of rise and fall. The horsemen reflect this pattern, an eternal warning about the fragility of human order. As their figures intertwine, fear and inevitability become palpable. And yet, they are not merely symbols of destruction. They infiltrate culture, art, and the collective imagination, showing that the apocalypse is not only a prophecy, but a mirror of our own choices and failures.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse did not remain confined to the pages of the Bible. Over the centuries, they have crossed into paintings, sculptures, and literature, becoming universal symbols of fear and destruction. Peter Bruegel, in the 16th century, captured them in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, each figure advancing with an intensity that almost pulses before the viewer. Later, writers such as Stephen King, in The Stand, reinterpreted the cycle of conquest, war, famine, and death, showing that these themes continue to haunt the human imagination. What Bruegel and King capture is the same essential truth. The horsemen are not merely prophecies, they are reflections of what humanity has always faced and will continue to face. But there is something even more unsettling. The cycle does not end with death. It begins again. Conquest, though momentarily dormant, rises once more. New wars emerge, new famines devastate populations, and death follows its course. It is a symbolic cycle that not only explains historical events, but warns us of inevitable patterns. As historian Arnold Toynbee wrote in A Study of History, civilizations do not fall for lack of external enemies, but because of internal failures that repeat patterns of destruction. And at this point, the reflection becomes personal. Each advance of the Horseman of Conquest, each strike of the Horseman of War, each scarcity brought by the Horseman of Famine, and each shadow of the Horseman of Death reminds us of our own collective choices. Are we perpetuating cycles of ambition, conflict, and suffering, or can we break the sequence before it is too late? As the last horseman disappears over the horizon, the question remains, is the apocalypse something that happens out there? Or is it a force that we live daily in our societies, in our cities, in our decisions? If you felt the intensity of this story, if the echoes of destiny and fear touched something within you, subscribe to the channel. Here we explore the deepest stories, the symbols that shape the world, and the mysteries that still challenge humanity. And now, think with me. If the four horsemen truly walk among us, will we merely watch, or will we intervene before the cycle completes once again?